Okay guys, so we are going to just cover a little bit of the material on this last section and this last packet of slides that we're going to cover on the exam. So we're going to actually skip some slides we left off finishing up talking about afterload, and we hadn't quite got to the contractility portion yet, but we're going to skip down to slide 30 in the packet, which is the acid-base balance stuff. And so we're going to cover the last 7 slides in the packet here in this little mini lesson, and then we're going to finish up with the rest of the slides on Monday. So get your notes out and follow along with your notes here, and we're going to go ahead and get started with the acid-base balance portion of the acute response to exercise. So the first question on here is why is it so crucial to maintain a proper acid-base balance in the body? And so if you look down on the bottom here, these figures are kind of a artistic depiction of proteins. Okay, and so proteins are made up of these different polypeptide chains, and due to each amino acid inside, they fold in the perfect manner to have nice little binding sites for certain atoms or molecules, and those molecules or atoms have to fit perfectly in there. And the folding of a protein comes about only by the perfect interaction between all the amino acids along the chain, getting them to fold in all the right directions. Okay, and so what happens is if we have a situation where we have too many hydrogen ions in the solution, meaning that we've been exercising and exercise intensity goes up so much that we start using that glycolytic system a lot, and we're using the glycolytic system a lot to produce ATP because we need energy so quickly, we will start producing a lot more lactic acid, and as you guys know, that lactic acid will start losing its hydrogen ions. It'll dissociate the hydrogen ion off of the lactic acid, and that's going to cause an increase in hydrogen ions. And so when you do that, when you have an increase in hydrogen ions, pH drops, and what you see is certain portions of these proteins, certain amino acids that have the ability to bind to positively charged ions, like hydrogen, will bind to the hydrogen. Okay, and when those hydrogen ions bind to those amino acids, that's going to change the charge in the amino acid. Let's say it's right here. Let's say this green one is binding right here with this pinkish one, and that's allowing this perfectly shaped active site to be here. And so if a hydrogen ion comes and binds right here, where we actually have an interaction between these two polypeptide chains and these two amino acids, and that's going to actually change the charge in this portion right here. And if that changes the charge, that means it's not going to be able to bind to this one anymore. And what happens is this is going to change its shape, and that's happening all over here. If we have all these hydrogen ions binding to these different amino acids that want to accept hydrogen ions, then you're pretty much going to be changing the shape of proteins, and so this is called protein denaturation. Okay, and so these proteins have been denatured, and this is what happens after they've been denatured. They just change shape, and you've completely lost this binding site. So this is the big issue with too low of a pH. And when you have too low of a pH, this happens. And but why do we care? Why do we care if these proteins are denatured like this? Well, the big thing with proteins being denatured, and why we care about proteins, especially for metabolism, is all reactions in our body rely on enzymes, and enzymes are proteins. Okay, and so if these enzymes that drive your metabolism are denaturing and not working anymore, then your ability to create ATP drops, and your ability to do any functions in your body drops. And so this is a big issue, and this is exactly why we care about this practically, is because this limits our enzymes' ability to do the job that they need to do. And any other proteins in the body can also start denaturing, like actin and myosin, and those things can start falling apart. And this is obviously going to lead to some problems with exercise and with all functions of the body. And so this question here, what causes hydrogen ions to increase the most during exercise? And this is high intensity exercise. The higher intensity exercise you have, then the more of an increase you have. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and move on to the next slide here. And so this is just showing the tolerable limits of pH in the blood. And so if you look at this top portion here, you can see that the tolerable limits of blood are around 6.9 to 7.5. Typical pH in the blood is around 7.1. But what we can see by these two slides is, or these two images here, is that we've been able to record muscle pH. This is pH right at the muscle. So measuring the blood right at the muscle. The blood has been able to get down to about 6.63, which is a much higher hydrogen ion concentration than your body's comfortable with. So this is definitely causing some denaturing of proteins. This is causing some major issues. So the question here is, how can blood get more acidic than the tolerable limit? And the key to that question is, this is happening in the muscle. Okay, it's not happening in your overall pH. Okay, so if you measured overall pH at this point, it would still be much higher than the 6.63. But if you measure it right at the muscle, right where all that hydrogen is being released, then we're going to see it at about 6.63. But overall, we might see a small drop in total body or arterial blood pH, but it's not going to be enough to get it down this low. Your body pH will never get down this low. And so the question is, how is this regulated? Well, this is regulated by your buffering systems. Okay, and that's what we're going to talk a little bit about. Sorry, my handwriting's pretty bad with this thing, but that's what we're going to talk about is these different buffering systems. Okay, and we've already spent some time talking about one of these, which is the major buffering system, and this is the bicarbonate buffering system. Okay, bicarbonate is the major buffering system that we use, and you can see this table 7.1 shows the amount of, let's say not the amount, but the percentage of contribution of each of the different types of buffer to your total buffering capacity in the body. Okay, and so what we see here is that bicarbonate accounts for about 64% of the buffering capacity in your body. So that's huge. And remember what bicarbonate is? Bicarbonate is that HCO3 negative molecule. That's bicarbonate. Okay, and this bicarbonate can accept a hydrogen ion. That's going a little bit off the screen there, but that should be a positively charged hydrogen ion. And when these two come together, then it's going to form carbonic acid, like we've talked about, and then it's going to dissociate into CO2 and water, and that CO2 is going to be able to be released by the lungs. Okay, so that's the first major type of buffer is bicarbonate. Okay, now let's look at the other two types. The other type is, so there's three types. One is bicarbonate. The second one is proteins. Okay, and here hemoglobin and proteins are actually together. They need to stay together. Okay, hemoglobin is a type of protein, and so those are all together. But it's just showing that hemoglobin itself has a very high capacity to buffer hydrogen ions. Okay, and that's shown there. 29% of your total buffering capacity happens via hemoglobin. Okay, so that's important. All right, so those are the two major buffers, and then you also have just some other proteins in your body that do that. The main one is albumin. That's your main plasma protein. Okay, and then you also have phosphates that do a little bit of this work, and those are shown here. We'll talk a little bit about the phosphate buffering system as it relates to the kidneys. Okay, so the big question of how does buffering work is answered by some type of molecule like bicarbonate, like this one up here, is able to accept a hydrogen ion because of its charge, because of its available electrons that want to covalently bond with that hydrogen ion and share the hydrogen ion's electron. And so these will bond together and cause this hydrogen ion to not be active anymore, and it can't bind to anything else and cause problems. Okay, so that's that. So we'll move on to the next. Okay, so the first buffer that we've talked about a lot already is this ventilatory buffer. Okay, and so one thing that we we've talked about when we talked about the control of ventilation, we talked about it in the quiz at least, is what effect does hydrogen have on respiration? And you guys know that the chemoreceptors in the blood, or sorry, in the arteries, all over your muscles, you have them all over the place, those can bind to hydrogen ions, and those will stimulate the respiratory centers in your brain to cause you to start breathing faster. Okay, and so as hydrogen ion levels go up, that stimulates breathing. You start breathing faster, you start breathing deeper, and this is a good system because when hydrogen ions are buffered, they get turned into CO2. And this is shown down here. So, sorry, this is shown over here. Okay, so this is the hydrogen ions coming out of the blood. Okay, and they can be dealt with a few different ways. Okay, this is kind of looking at all the different ways they can be dealt with, but coming out of the blood, and what happens is, they're coming out of the cells into the blood, and we see them binding here with bicarbonate ion. That's what this binding is. That's going to lead to the formation of carbonic acid, which is going to dissociate into CO2 and water. Okay, and this pathway right here, see if I can do this without being too messy. That pathway is the bicarbonate buffering system. Okay, and I want you to understand this pathway for sure. Okay, hydrogen ions come out, bind with bicarbonate, turn into carbonic acid, and then dissociate into CO2 and water. Okay, now this CO2 can make its way out of the body via the lungs. Right, it's carried. CO2 is carried in the blood out to the lungs, and then it's breathed out. Okay, breathe out into the air, and that's how we get rid of CO2. Okay, so this makes sense that hydrogen ions will increase respiration, right? Hydrogen ions increase respiration by increasing ventilation depth and also ventilation rate. So you're breathing faster and you're breathing deeper. Okay, and so then the question is, what effect does this have on CO2? Well, if you're breathing faster and breathing deeper, then you're going to be breathing CO2 out. So CO2 levels are going to go down, which by sending this CO2 out of the body, this allows for these hydrogen ions to be dealt with effectively, and they're dealt with in that manner by breathing out. Okay, so then what does this do to pH? This increases pH, right? A higher pH means going in the more basic level, and this is a good thing as we're trying to get back to a neutral pH when it's dropped down a little bit. So that's the ventilatory portion of this. Then you also have some buffering that occurs in the kidneys. Okay, and so the kidneys have a slightly different way to do it. It really happens by two different ways. Okay, so when there are extra hydrogen ions in the blood, which is depicted right here, okay, the hydrogen ions diffuse into the walls of the kidneys right here. Okay, go in there, and then from there they go into the urine that's being developed in the kidneys. Okay, and these hydrogen ions can now bind with this molecule right here, which is called which is a portion of the phosphate buffering system. It's called sodium phosphate. Okay, and the sodium phosphate is a base that can accept these hydrogen ions. Okay, and then after it accepts the hydrogen ions, you see it goes from being Na2HPO4 to now NaH2PO4. Okay, so it got rid of the sodium when it did that, and that sodium goes out there. And now it becomes this, and this is buffered. These hydrogen ions have been dealt with. Okay, so we have some of the phosphate buffering system that happens right in the kidneys that can go ahead and deal with those hydrogen ions. Okay, and now the other important piece of what the kidneys can do is the kidneys actually help produce bicarbonate. Okay, so inside the walls of the kidneys, the cells inside the kidneys can produce bicarbonate and release it back out into the blood. And so this is important because you get this increase in bicarbonate, and this is going to allow your buffering capacity to go up. Okay, so there's really two effects that the kidneys have on buffering. One is by the phosphate buffering system, and so that means directly buffering hydrogen ions by that system, and 2 is by increasing bicarbonate in the blood. Okay, and both of these act to decrease hydrogen as well as increase pH. Okay, so that is the renal buffering system. Right. So 2 more slides here, hang with me. So one thing that's really important with, move that over just a little bit. One thing that's really important with this, with recovery from exercise is doing an active recovery or a cool down. Okay, as I know you've probably all heard that you need to cool down after exercising. And one of the main reasons is to help your body deal with some of the lactate and the hydrogen ions that are out there in your blood due to that intense workout that you just did. Okay, and so what we see here on the right is a graph showing blood lactate on the y-axis here, and then this is time, recovery time here. Okay, and down here, a little bit below 2 millimoles per liter is the resting blood lactate levels. Okay, and they have 2 different scenarios. The blue is passive recovery, where someone was exercising pretty hard and then they just stopped. Okay, and then this is someone exercising pretty hard with the red, but then they do an active recovery where they're doing light intensity exercise. And what do you see here? You see that it's a much steeper drop, much faster drop in lactate when the person is exercising a little bit still. Just very light exercise, maybe just walking to do their cool down. Okay, so that's important. We see a much quicker drop in lactate than we do. See, the passive recovery is going down here. Takes about 100 minutes to get close, about 2 hours to get all the way down to resting. But you can see here with the active recovery, it goes down much quicker, gets down to real low levels after about 35 minutes, and then almost down to resting after about 60 minutes. So much quicker ability to deal with lactate if you're doing a little bit of a cool down. Okay, and the key here is the reason why this happens is because you're activating the muscle pump system that we talked about, getting more flow of blood through the body. Okay, and so as the blood flow continues to flow through your body and those veins continue to be smashed, you get the muscle pump system pumping the blood that has lactate, extra lactate and extra hydrogen ions in it, and it pumps it all through the body. Okay, and that allows it to get back to the liver, where lactate can go through the Cori cycle and turn back into glucose. It allows it to go to the other cells in the body where lactate can be used as a substrate to get turned back into glucose. And so that's going to happen much quicker if you have this active cool down versus a passive cool down. And it's all because of an increase in blood flow. Okay, so question here of how long does it take to remove lactate after exhaustive exercise? It can take up to 2 hours. Okay, take up to 2 hours. And how long does it take to remove the excess hydrogen ions and return pH to normal? Yeah, so this process of getting rid of hydrogen ions is we can look at it in 2 different ways. One is when does pH actually get back to normal? Okay, so pH getting back to normal, this is the overall body pH, takes only 5 to 10 minutes. Okay, so that's pH. So your body wants to get that back to normal very, very quickly because you only have a small range of pH that you want to be able to function in. Okay, but then the question of just dealing with all of those extra hydrogen ions, there's going to be still an increase in areas right around the muscle, but it's not enough to really affect full body pH, and so that may take about 30 to 40 minutes. I don't really have room for that, but 30 to 40 minutes for the hydrogen ion. So that's for the hydrogen ion, and this is for pH. And I know you're probably thinking, well, pH is a measurement of hydrogen ions, right? Well, yes, that's true, but with the pH we're talking about full body pH, looking at the arterial blood, and with this, when I'm talking about hydrogen ions here, we're talking about just looking at hydrogen ions, or you can call it pH just right at the muscle. That might take a little bit longer to go down than the pH in the blood would take to go down. More like 5 to 10 minutes. So those are important there. Okay, and this last slide just pretty much shows lactate pH concentrations at the muscle, which is here, and then also at the blood after an intense bout of exercise, a 400 meter run. Okay, and so you can see that each of these times are pretty fast. So there's 4 different runners here. Runner 1, 2, 3, 4. This is their time on the 400 meter run. And so when we're looking at muscle pH is dropping down low, and these guys getting all the way down 6.59. So that's very acidic. That's gonna and then that is reflected by a higher lactate level as well. All of them are very low. That's below the tolerable range. But you see, we still never get pH, full body pH in the blood below the 6.9, which is the tolerable limit for pH. Okay, and then when we look at total body lactate concentrations, it's also doesn't even get close to as high as it does at the muscle. So there's a difference between looking at lactate and pH at the muscle versus the full body. Okay, so you can think about the havoc that all these extra hydrogen ions are reaching or are causing here at the muscle, causing all that denaturing of proteins, as well as causing all those pain receptors to be stimulated. Okay, and that's a big thing. I forgot to mention that your body has a nice built-in negative feedback mechanism. As more hydrogen ions are released, the pH drops. That's going to stimulate pain receptors to get you to stop exercising, and that is what causes the burn during exercise. And so it's a nice negative feedback mechanism that your body uses to make sure you don't get pH too low and cause too much irreversible damage in the form of denaturing, and that's caused by pain, by those pain receptors. Alright guys, so that's all we're going to cover here on this portion, and hope you guys have a good weekend, and we'll see you on Monday.